Hi, welcome back. In this video, I want to show you how to draw this hyper-realistic portrait of John Wick using graphite pencils. So let's get started. So these are the art supplies I'm going to use for this drawing, and you can pause the video right here to note them down. I draw the outlines using grid method, and you can find all the references including this outline grid reference on my Patreon profile. Link is in the description. I'm using this A3 size paper from my ordinary drawing paper pad, and the drawing portion area is 11 x 14 inches. I'm going to mask the edges of this paper using masking tape. It will help you get a straight and sharp border in the end. Okay, so first of all, I'm going to add the background using an 8p graphite powder with a bigger draw brush like this. Make sure to add this layer in a circular scribbling motion to get a smooth and even finish. And when you think you are done with the shading process, grab a tissue paper and use the same circular scribbling motion to blend this base layer. Moving on to the face, and first of all I'm going to add the base layer in the forehead using HP powder with a medium sized dry brush. You can also use the pressure technique to add darker shades and create depth in these shadowed areas. Now blending everything together with a tissue paper to get a smooth canvas for the next layers. For the skin texture, I'm using a 5p pencil and adding these soft strokes to create wrinkles and pores, and then lightly blend it afterwards with a medium sized draw brush to give it a smooth finish. Now grab your perfection eraser and add these small dotted lines and highlights in between the darker lines you just added. Make sure to add these lines and highlights in the direction of the wrinkles and fine lines, just like this. Notice that these dotted lines are more curved near and above the eyebrows. As we can see that after using the perfection eraser, the darkness of the base layer has faded. So I'm going to use my 5p pencil and add these small but dark texture lines and dots in between the highlights. Now for the fine lines and wrinkles on the forehead, use your 5p pencil with a lighter pressure and low angle to add these soft horizontal lines. Add these lines randomly at first, and when you think you are done with it, you can use your perfection eraser and add these segments and cuts to give it a blended and realistic look. Now I'm going to grab my sharp tip mono zero eraser to further brighten some of these highlights, especially near or above the eyebrow area to make them look sharp and pop up even more. Basically, we added the base layer of highlights with the perfection eraser, and now we are brightening the highlights specifically in the center area of the forehead. But still, as we can see in the reference, that some of the highlights near the wrinkles and shadowed areas are much bright and sharp. So in order to add these extra bright highlights, I'm going to use my electric razor with a sharp tip to add these small dots and lines over the previous highlights. You can sharpen the tip of your electric razor using a fine grit sandpaper with a grit size between 300 to 500. Or you can also use this Faber-Castell scraper or lead sharpener for this purpose. You can find the link of the product in the description. I will finalize the hair in the end, but for now I'm darkening this hair cluster just to get a proper working area for the eyes and face, etc. by using an 8p pencil. Now for the eyebrows and darker areas around the eye, I'm going to use the same 8p pencil to add these slightly curved strokes. If you're not comfortable with adding these dark strokes in one go, then you can add the lighter strokes with less pressure first, and then use higher pressure and sharper tip to add these extra dark and faded lines for the eyebrow hair. Lightly blend this area with a small draw brush only if required. I won't recommend this if you are using an extra smooth paper like this one. The paper I'm using is very smooth, and blending with a draw brush scrapes off the darker layer of the graphite. So to overcome this, I'm adding the final dark layer again, and this time I'm not going to blend it, and look at the results now. Grab your mono zero eraser and add these small highlights in between the eyebrow hair to get a realistic look. The eyebrows in this specific reference are so dark that we can't see the individual black hair. So you need to invest some extra time in the highlighting process to get realistic looking eyebrows. I'm using my perfection eraser to add these final highlights to merge the skin texture with eyebrow hair, and also to blend the starting portion of the eyebrows. This process of adding highlights above the eyebrow will also make this whole area look more 3D and realistic. Now I'm going to repeat the similar process of shading, highlighting and adding texture on this right eyebrow as I did for the left one. Now moving on to the eyeball, and first of all I'm going to darken the pupil area with a pitch black shade using my 8B pencil, and then use the same pencil with lighter pressure to shade the iris. You can also shade this lower eyelid with a darker grade pencil like 5B or 9B, but make sure to use lighter pressure because it's a base layer and you have to blend it afterwards. I'm using a small dry brush here to get precise and seamless blending. As I said earlier, the paper I'm using here is very smooth, but this specific reference is relatively darker. So in order to achieve the darker overall look in the drawing, I'm using the darker grade pencils like 5B and 9B as a base layer instead of the usual HB or B pencils, because the leads of lighter grade pencils are hard. So if we use those pencils on a smooth paper like this, they will flatten the paper texture and you won't able to add final darker layers easily. So that's why I'm adding multiple layers using both 5B and 9B pencils and blending them as required to achieve depth around the eye. I've also shaded and extended the hair clusters using my 8B pencil during this process. Now I'm using my Perfection Eraser to lighten the shades in this sclera and on the lower eyelid to make a proper shape and to get a 3D look. Then you can use your electric eraser to add these sharp highlights on the iris and also near the tear duct area to make the eye look more shiny and realistic, just like this. For the wrinkles on the lower portion of the eye, I'm going to add these small dots and lines as a base layer of skin texture using a Perfection Eraser first. And then to further lighten up some of the highlights, I'm going to use a Mono Zero Eraser and add these white dots and textural lines in between. As you can see in the reference image that it also has some extra bright highlights on the wrinkles and skin texture. So for that, I'm going to use my electric eraser and add these extra bright highlights and dots. I'm going to repeat the similar process of shading, blending and adding skin texture in this right eye as I did for the left one. Okay, now moving on to the nose, and first of all I'm going to darken the outline of the cheek and nostrils with a 5B pencil and then add a base layer in the nose and cheeks portion using HB graphite powder with a medium sized dry brush. Then I'm going to remove the extra graphite powder from the areas using a clean tissue paper. Now for the second layer in the shadows, I'm going to use my 6B graphite powder with a small dry brush and further darken these shadowed areas around the nose and cheeks. If you don't have a graphite powder kit, you can make one at home by watching this video from the cards. And when you're done shading with the brush, you can use a clean tissue paper to pick up the extra graphite powder and lighten some of these dark shadows in between. When you think you have achieved your desired level of smoothness in the base layer of shadows, you can use your 5B pencil and further darken these extra dark and shadowed portions around the nose and cheek. Now I'm adding the second layer of contrast in the same areas using my 8B pencil and will blend it afterwards with a small draw brush, just like this. For the highlights and texture on the nose, first of all I'm going to add these small and slightly curved horizontal lines on the upper portion of the nose bridge using a Perfection Eraser. And then I'm adding a mixture of straight and circular highlights on the remaining area of the nose bridge. You can also use the same Perfection Eraser to add this light skin texture and highlights on the sides of the nose and also in this left portion of the face. Okay, now moving on to the right side of the face, and the texturing and highlighting process of this side differs a little bit from the left one. So first of all, I'm going to map out the skin texture on this under eye area by adding this type of small dotted and line texture with a Perfection Eraser. And I'm also cleaning the excess graphite powder from the cheeks with the help of the same Perfection Eraser to get the desired layer for future layers of texture and highlights. Now for the highlights on these wrinkles, I'm going to use a Mono Zero Eraser with a chisel tip to add these sharp and small faded lines under the eyes and on the cheeks. And then use your HB pencil with a sharp tip to add these small but slightly curved lines in between the white line we just added. These lines are darker like a 3B pencil, but still I'm not using my medium graphite pencils like 3B or 5B. because they will mess up the paper texture, which will affect the overall look of the skin texture. So to overcome this issue, I'm using this HB pencil and layering it over and over to get our desired smooth but dark lines. But if you still notice any sharp and rough looking lines, then you can use the smallest blending stump you have and lightly smudge these lines to get a smooth finish. If you have accidentally smudged the highlights during the blending process, you can use your Mono Zero Eraser again and sharpen the highlights. You can repeat this similar process of adding texture and highlights back and forth and experiment with different tools till you get the desired results for the realistic skin texture and wrinkles. The overall process of adding highlights and texture in the cheek area is similar to the upper part. The only difference here is that I didn't use the Perfection Eraser as a base layer for the highlights. Instead, I only used the Mono Zero Eraser, but you have to keep an eye on the reference to see where the highlights are dotted and where they are lined. Also notice that the directions of these lines are changing depending on the area. So keep the reference image in mind when you are adding these lines. And by the way, you can get access to our premium content and support this channel through Patreon. You can sign up through different membership levels and get access to all the outline and grid references, etc. We have an ever-growing library of hundreds of exclusive and real-time tutorials, and you will also get access to 4 new tutorials every month. You can also post your artworks in our active community of patrons and participate in our weekly critique sessions where I give my honest and positive critiques on your artworks, so you can improve your skills and get better with your drawing. Visit the link in description and become a premium member today. Okay, now I'm going to create depth around these highlights using a B or HB pencil. Most of the graphite artists usually add these dots using harder pencils like 5H or 6H because you need very light shades in between the highlights. But I prefer to add these dots using a lighter or medium grade pencil like B or HB because harder pencils usually indent the paper and make the texture look rough. But if you use a lighter or medium grade pencil for the dots and pores and then use the blending stump to lightly smudge them like this, it will automatically lighten the texture and will also make it look more 3D and realistic, just like this. Now for this specific small but faded skin texture, I'm going to use this technique with my electric eraser. Add a small white dot like this with your sharp tip electric eraser and then use the same electric eraser without turning it on and lightly extend the white dots outwards. In this way, your electric eraser will work as a Mono Zero Eraser and you will get a smooth and smudged outline with a bright center for the highlights around the pores. Now for these final highlights and touches, I'm using Perfection Eraser and Mono Zero Eraser along with a 5P pencil to add these small lines and dots for the skin texture. The nose portion also has these extra sharp and dotted highlights which I'm going to add using my electric eraser as I did for the cheek portion. You can also use Perfection Eraser for the soft highlights and medium grade pencil to create depth in your skin texture where required. Moving on to the hair, and first of all I'm going to fill the area with a base layer for the hair strands using an 8B pencil. But make sure to fill in the direction of the hair so that you can easily add highlights later on. You can also add the light individual hair around the outline of the hair clusters to make them look realistic but slightly out of focus. Now I'm using my Mono Zero Eraser with a chisel tip and adding these highlights in between to make the hair cluster shine and pop up more. Notice that each single highlight is faded near the ends and sharper in the middle. And also some of the highlights are curved depending on the area you are working in. So don't add straight and blunt highlights. It will make the hair clusters look odd and unrealistic. And again, make sure to keep your Mono Zero Eraser clean and sharp at all times during this erasing process. Because when you are erasing on a darker grade pencil like an 8B or 9B, the eraser gets dirtier with every single stroke. So I had to clean the tip with every single stroke during this entire process. And make sure you have plenty of refills for your Mono Zero Eraser because it's a long and tiring process. I'm going to repeat a similar process for the hair on the right side. For the beard portion, firstly I'm going to add a barrier line between the cheeks and lips with an 8B pencil. Then use your 8B powder with a medium sized brush and fill this area with a base layer. And again make sure you use a round circular motion to avoid patchiness in your shades. Now I'm going to add hair texture using my 8B pencil and add these small strokes in the direction of the hair. Make sure you keep the overall shape of the beard in mind when adding these dark lines for the beard texture. You can make a light outline with your pencil to help you during this process. For the highlights and skin texture, I'm using a perfection eraser to add these small dots and line texture in this highlighted portion between the cheeks and beard. I'm going to use the same perfection eraser to add these highlights in the beard portion. But notice that in this area the highlights are slightly apart from each other and are also in the direction of the hair. Some of these lines are brighter and round from the start and some of them are faded and thin, so add them accordingly. And for the dark texture and shadows, I'm using an 8B pencil to add these dotted lines and shade around the highlighted portion. As you can see in the reference image that light is falling from the left side, so this specific area is brighter than the other portions. So to achieve the similar results like the reference image, I'm going to use my electric eraser to add these sharp and bright highlights, just like this. Okay, now moving on to the mustache area, and first of all I'm going to add these rough directional lines for the hair using my 8B pencil. This whole beard, chin and lips area has similar shades and highlights, so I decided to work on all of them at once. First of all, I'm going to repeat the similar process of adding directional lines with the 5B first, and also filled the lower lip with these light vertical lines and texture, and then filling the area with an 8B pencil for the rest of the beard and lips portion. Now I'm going to lightly blend the mustache and beard area with a medium sized draw brush to get a smooth base for the next darker layers. Okay, I'm going to use my 8B pencil to add these individual hair in the mustache and beard portion. As you can notice in the reference that some areas of the beard have less hair and skin is peeking through those areas. And some of the areas have more hair, making the area look more dense and dark. So I will add these slightly curved individual strokes with less in-between spacing for the denser areas. And I will keep more spacing in between the hair in less dense areas. I also shaded the lips using the same 8B pencil during this process. I darkened the outline first with an 8B pencil with a higher pressure to get this defined lip line, and then slightly extended it upwards and downwards but with a lesser pressure using the same 8B pencil to create this gradient of shade, especially in the left portion. The light shade we have added here using darker pencils looks sharp and textured because it is unblended, but we cannot use a brush or tissue paper for blending purpose because it will smudge all the fine and sharp details of hair around the skin. So for this, I'm adding a layer of 2H pencil over these unblended areas. You need to maintain a low angle to blend everything together and get a smooth and realistic skin. I'm also adding these small individual and random hair in the beard to give the hair and overall area a more realistic look. For the highlights around the nose, I'm going to use a mono zero eraser first and add this small dotted texture, and then I will use an electric eraser to add fine and sharp highlights over them later on. I'm going to use the same electric eraser with a chisel tip to add these bright highlights in between these dark hairs to make the hair look more shiny and realistic. Now I'm going to add these lighter and softer highlights along these darker vertical lines of the lips using a sharp tip perfection eraser, and then use a mono zero eraser and add these small but sharp brighter highlights in between or where required. To further fine tune these highlights and to make them look crisp and sharp, I'm going to use my electric eraser as well. The highlights on this specific area of the beard are softer than the mustache, so I'm going to add them using my chisel tip mono zero eraser instead of an electric eraser. This specific area of chin has some harsh highlights or shines on the skin, so I'm going to use my electric eraser in this vertical position and add this type of sharp dotted texture. And I'm also going to add these extra bright highlights on the beard hair and where required. Okay, now moving on to the color, and first of all I'm going to use a big graphite powder with a medium sized dry brush and add a base layer. I also shaded the darker areas with the same big powder but with a higher pressure on the brush. And then I used tissue paper to blend these layers together to get the overall smooth look of the color. And then I used my 8B pencil to extend the hair downwards on the collar area. Moving on to the coat, and I shaded all this area with a pitch black shade using my 8B pencil. I also used the same 8B pencil for the shading in the tie, but decreased the pressure in this lower area to get softer shades as required, and then used the same technique to shade this shirt area as I did for the collar. The pitch black shade we have added using 8B pencil looks patchy because the paper is too smooth for a darker grade pencil to stick on. So I'm adding another layer of 2H over it to blend the patchiness and to move the graphite around and to fill the dull spots on the surface. This additional step will leave us with a blended and toned area just like the reference image. Now for the highlights in the collar, I'm going to use a perfection eraser to add the soft highlights on the edges and where required. And to further fine tune the highlights, I'm going to use an electric eraser and add these extra sharp highlights in between the softer ones. And then use the same electric eraser but without turning it on to merge them with the softer ones. Just like this. The tie is edited into an hourglass in the reference image. That's why it has this glossy texture and highlights on it. So I'm going to add the soft highlights using my perfection eraser and add sharp highlights using my mono zero or electric eraser. I forgot to add the highlights in the hair earlier, that's why I'm adding them now. But you can add them during the hair drawing process or however you like. And with this last step, we are done with this hyper realistic John Wick's portrait. It takes so much time and efforts to create this tutorial, so please leave a like if you enjoyed this one. It helps me a lot as an artist. So if you want to get the real-time tutorial of this drawing, you can visit my Patreon profile. And if you want to learn the basics of drawing first, you can join my course on Udemy. All the links are in the description down below. So thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.